Okay, we're in Joey Pigza Loses Control, Chapter 3. It's called Storybook Land. So you know all of his titles, Jack Contos' titles, they give you a little bit of a preview of what the chapter might be about. So Storybook Land, that's something I've never heard about, but it does remind me of stories like traditional fairy tales like Cinderella, Rapunzel, maybe something like that. Okay, Mom was disappearing down the road and Dad was shifting around in front of me with his arms and legs crossing back and forth like he was sharpening knives. He was wired, no doubt about it. When I looked in a mirror, I could see it in my eyes, and now I could see it in his. Even with my medicine working real good, I felt nervous inside. He was so hyper. Now I knew what Mom meant when she said he was like me, only bigger. He was taller than me too. He had long arms and pointy elbows, and a humming sound came out of his body as if he was run by an electric motor. I took a deep breath, and even though my insides were churning, I was determined to stand there and be as stiff as the rusted-up Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. Well, Joey, Dad said with a grin rocking back and forth on his face like a canoe on high seas, you can call me Carter. And he stuck out his hand to shake. I knew I'd never call him that. But before I could call him the one important word I had waited so long to use, Grandma stepped forward. Truce, she barked and stuck out her wrinkled old hand, which looked like a dried fish. Since you're going to be here for a while, we might as well get along. She had her hair cut short and slicked all the way forward with something so shiny, I thought it was covered with Christmas tree tinsel. Come on, Grandma persisted and poked her hand forward again. Don't make me think you aren't happy to see me. I squinted back at her. The sun reflected off her hair and directly into my eyes. No, I said, and began to say that I was happy to see her because the last time I saw her, she had been walking off down the street and I figured she was washed down the sewer drain where I found her shoelace and nothing else. But she jerked her head back before I could say no. No, she squawked like a parrot. Did you say no? Well, I can see already that you have stopped using the good manners I taught you when you lived with me. I have manners, I said, with my voice sounding tight. Mom makes me use manners. Have I done anything wrong yet? No. Have I said anything mean? No. I'm polite. I still hadn't moved an inch except for my mouth, which was now all oiled up from defending myself. Grandma clamped her lips together and turned away to glare over at Carter. I told you how that person lets him run the show. She complained and gasped her breath, the cart leading the horse. Carter kept whipping around, and finally an uneven sound came out of his mouth like a car engine that wouldn't start. Then he waved his hand in front of his face as if it were a magic wand, and suddenly he went from a stutter to full speed ahead talking. That's all in the past, he shouted and pulled Grandma behind him a little too hard. I've been thinking about what we should do today, and I have the perfect idea. Instantly, he was full of energy and happiness, and he smiled real big and announced, we were going to Storybook Land Fun Park. You have to see this place, he said. It's where my whole life turned around. I wasn't sure what he meant. If his life turned around when he was a kid, that would mean it got worse. But if it turned around as an adult, that would mean he got better. Hey, this thing is heavy, he shouted, lifting my duffel bag. What you got in here? Clothes, shoes, books, my trumpet. I said to picture it all, like it was the list Mom made for me. Did you bring a baseball glove? He asked as I followed him up the porch. 'Cause I'm coaching a team and I could use a ringer like you. No, I replied. I don't have one. Don't sweat it, he said, plopping my duffel bag down inside the front door. I'll pick one up this week. Now let me see the size of your hand. I held mine up with my fingers spread wide open, as he did too. When our hands pressed together, I felt a jolt as if he had a joy buzzer in his. We piled into his big old car, and all the way to Storybook Land, I imagined playing baseball. I was pretty good at throwing rocks, so I figured I'd be pretty good at pitching. I wanted to tell Dad that I would love to play on his team, but I couldn't get a word in. He just kept talking and talking, his nonstop sunny talk about what a great summer we were going to have. He had tons of plans and that we would get caught up as father and son, and soon all of our rough past would be behind us, and we would have nothing but smooth sailing for our future. And he especially kept talking about Storybook Land. You gotta see this place. Gotta. Grandma sat next to him with gray clouds of cigarette smoke over her head, as if her grumpy mood had set her hair on fire. Finally, after Dad said, "You gotta see it," for the 100th time, she yelled at him, "Okay, Carter, we're on our way there, for God's sake. Give that motor mouth of yours a rest." She was going to say more, but she got choked off by a coughing fit. Dad continued taking his fast talk. And when he took a breath, I tried to tell him about wanting to play on his team, but he cut me off like a clueless driver and kept going. So I listened, which was okay with me because it made me happy, made him happy. I figured I'd tell him when I had a chance. For now, it was enough that we were together, even if he were talking to me, taking me to a place which was way too young for my age. He was trying to get to know me, so it was fine. We had to start somewhere, and maybe in his mind, I was still a baby. After we got out of the car, Grandma announced she would allow Dad and me some time alone to get caught up while she played miniature golf. "Gonna work on my short game," she wheezed, then bent over, hacking with her hands over her knees. When she finally pulled herself together and stood up, she said, "Should have brought my oxygen tank today. It's smoggy." She has emphysema, so it's a really bad disease that you get when your lungs are. If it's from smoking, you can get it from other reasons, other pollution issues, things that may have just destroyed your lungs, and it makes it really hard to breathe. And a lot of times they end up having to have an oxygen tank to help them breathe. "See you later," I said as nicely as I could because she was a handful when she got mad. Dad and I headed down a little stone path lined with flowers and a short white picket fence that wasn't tall enough to keep out the golden squirrels. As we strolled, teenagers passed by, dressed up as storybook characters. They waved at us. When they smiled, their painted faces wrinkled up into strange masks. We waved back. Then Woof from Little Red Riding Hood howled at some cowering kid who screamed and clutched his mother's pants. Dad nudged me with his elbow and said, "Your granny would eat that old wolf alive." "I think so," I said, then added, "But why does she need oxygen?" "Emphysema," he said, "from smoking. She can't get a whole breath and now needs to carry around one of those little oxygen tanks. But some days she's too embarrassed to do it. I just hope she can get through the golf okay." "Me too," I said, imagining Granny slumped over the miniature windmill or halfway down the little wishing well. It wasn't funny. The first exhibit we came to was the sad-eyed Humpty Dumpty. From Dad's build-up, I was expecting something very fancy, but there was only a painted half-cracked concrete egg leaning against the cinder block wall. All the king's horses and men were made of carved wood and staked into the ground. They were tilted one way or another and splattered with mud. "This is where it happened," Dad whispered as he squatted down and wiped the figures clean with his handkerchief. "Right at this spot." He drew an X on the ground with his finger. "This is where my whole life turned around. I had wandered in here one night after having a few too many drinks, and I passed out, And the next thing I knew, it was morning, and a girl dressed as Little Miss Muffet was waking me up with her shoe and telling me to move on, or else she'd call the cops. I stood up and stared over at old Humpty Dumpty, and I thought, I'm as bad as he is. I'm nothing more than a teary-eyed, busted-up egg. And as I left the park, I thought, man, I could learn a lesson from that Humpty Dumpty dude. So the next day, I came back and just stared at him. And the more I stared, the less I liked myself. I didn't want to be a pathetic broken egg with everyone trying and failing to put me back together again. I decided on that spot that Humpty was never going to get better. He didn't have the willpower to stop whining and get off his can and pull his own self together and move on. Right after that, I went to the clinic and dried out. And whenever I get a chance, I come to pat and polish old Humpty on the head. Believe me, I've been in every clinic in Pittsburgh, but not one of them taught me a lesson more valuable than what I've learned in storybook land. You know what I mean? He said. He turned toward me and waited for me to say something. I think I know what you mean, I said, but I wasn't quite sure if when last year I was sent down to the special ed school, I had become a Humpty Dumpty who had to glue himself back together again. Because I didn't do it myself. I had a lot of good people to help me. You know, Dad started up again, flapping his arms around as we strolled along the path past the 3 little pigs. This isn't a kiddie park after all. I mean, everything I see here gets me to thinking. Dad, can I talk to you for a while? I asked. Nobody's stopping you, he said. 2 people can talk at once. It's like watching TV and talking. No big deal. Yeah, but it's hard for me to do that. I want to listen to you, then I want you to listen to me and go back and forth like people who want to know about each other. Sure, we can do that, he said. Now keep talking, and we'll go down to Jack and the Beanstalk. Man, this is one place I really did some deep thinking about you. The beanstalk was a telephone pole painted green with wide metal leaves running both sides. Check this out, Dad said, and scampered up the pole as if he had done it 100 times already. At the top of the giant's balcony, Dad stood on it, shaded his eyes with his hands, and shouted, Fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of a little one. I laughed a little at him and shaded my eyes too. Fee-fi-fo-fum, I boomed. I smelled the blood of a great big bum. Joey, he said, making a sad Humpty face, there's not a man alive who wouldn't feel some guilt for abandoning his kid, but I'll make it up to you. I'll think of some way to pay you back for all I've done wrong to you. We were apart for a long time, but from now on, I swear, I'll stick with you, and if you disappear again, I'll sniff you out like the giant and track you down. I stared up at him, and he looked huge, as if he could see around the entire world and sniff me out no matter where I was. Half of me loved it because he was saying we would never be lost from each other again. The other half was a little scared because if I wanted to get away from him, it meant I couldn't run or hide or disappear without him finding me. Joey, do you get what I'm saying to you, son? This place made me think. He squinted and thumped his forehead with the palm of his hand. Think like never before. Dad, I asked, looking up at him as I stumbled forward, can we do something a little more fun now? Yeah, you could take a break from all this thinking, he said. He climbed down the beanstalk and swung me around and nearly snapped my neck. Sure, let's go get our pictures taken so we can always remember this day, and then we can go to the bumper cars in the park. We walked down the path, and he continued talking nonstop. Now look over there, he said, and pointed at the Goldilocks and the 3 bears and their little house. We can learn so much about each other. How hot do you like your porridge? What's porridge? I asked. I never ate any. See? He declared. See? Now I know something more about you. And before I could ask him how he liked his porridge, he said, okay, who's smarter, Hansel or Gretel? Hansel, I said. He tricked the witch with the chicken bone. Who do you? Oh, look, he said. There's the old lady who lives in a shoe. She had so many accidents she didn't know what to do. And there goes that kissin' fool, Georgie Porgy. I know how he feels.